Hello, welcome to TAXtalk November 2019. This is a TAXtalk Special that we're putting on, and we thought we'd take the opportunity to talk to you about some of the work we're doing at the moment on other issues. Now, my name is Anita Monteith and I look after tax policy and business tax at ICAEW. I have today a special guest with us, Donna Dimmack, who is the Fraud Education Manager from Lloyds Bank.
Yeah.
Welcome. And Caroline Miskin, who will be well known to many of you as our Practitioner Tax Manager. Welcome, Caroline.
Hello.
Now, today we are going to be discussing, as we've got you with us, Donna, cybercrime. And it's going to have particular relevance to a lot of the people watching this broadcast because it is the self-assessment season. We've also got, of course, Making Tax Digital, which is about HMRC digitalising increasingly much of our tax system, so cybercrime is more important than ever. But let's just start off with fraud, because this is something we're hearing more and more about. Why is this?
It is unfortunately something we're hearing more and more about. You may be surprised to know that fraud is now the most prevalent crime in the UK at the moment. So each and every one of us and each and every business are more likely to suffer a fraud more than any other type of attack. Last year, 1 in every 2 businesses were impacted by fraud. Yet, you know, a lot of statistics and surveys are indicating that not enough of us are aware of those risks. UK Finance, for example, did a survey that indicated nearly 7 out of 10 SME business leaders don't have any awareness of payments-related fraud, and that's leaving businesses vulnerable. So we're hearing more about it because the threat is growing, but hopefully the more we can educate and talk about the subject, the more we can protect businesses from falling victim.
Quite. And a big part of your job is actually to work in fraud education. Is that education of businesses or individual taxpayers?
Absolutely. So as fraud education manager, specifically focused on the commercial banking sector. So me and my team travel across the UK delivering events. We've done many with yourselves, which has been brilliant, to educate as many businesses as possible about those risks. If we can understand the risks, we can reflect back on our business, carry out self-assessments from a fraud risk perspective, because not enough businesses are doing that, but close any vulnerabilities that are identified. Education is proving over the last few years to make a difference in keeping our businesses and indeed ourselves protected.
That's great. Do you find actually talking to people makes them sort of sit up and listen or take note more than just sending them letters?
Yeah, when we actually reach individuals and businesses, they're really, you know, positively receptive of the information that is provided and having that awareness, and they do sometimes have that shock factor, sometimes a little bit scary about what is actually happening, which sometimes then puts people off. But if we have that awareness, as scary as it seems, we can identify any actions that we can put in place to help us from not falling victim in the future.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about some of the more sophisticated frauds that are happening. Is that what you're finding, that they're getting more and more clever?
Yeah, so fraud always evolves. You know, as we change and the environment changes, fraudsters will evolve and change. And over 90% of successful fraud attacks involve malicious software. So somebody within an organisation clicking on a link or an attachment that downloads that malicious software into that business. And the levels of malicious software out there do continue to get more and more sophisticated. However, a lot of frauds do come down to just the human element, simple mistakes in just not checking that bank details are genuine for a new supplier, or if a supplier that we use regularly has changed their bank details, not checking those are genuine before we issue that payment. And that's why I think education is making such a difference, because if we're aware of how these frauds are taking place and how fraudsters dupe us into making these payments, we can make sure that those double checking on bank details is being done.
We hear a lot about things like malware. Is that where they actually put something onto your computer?
Yes, so usually in the form of an email where somebody has clicked on a link or an attachment, and that by doing that downloads malicious software into the organisation. They change their approach, so a lot of organisations have really great firewalls and systems to prevent fraudulent emails coming in. But if, say, you have colleagues who can access social media platforms, fraudsters can send messages through those platforms. You know, if there's a local cafe nearby and they'll submit an offer, and somebody might click on that because that offer seems really interesting.
2 for 1 coffees,
yes, and then they can download that way. So it's really kind of key. However a communication comes in, do not click on any links or attachments unless we know it's come from a genuine source.
Caroline's a great fan of Twitter. You tweet a lot, don't you, for the tax faculty?
Reasonably active. A lot of people are more active. But yes, I am always very careful not to disclose any personal data. I tend to stick to tax.
Yes, tax is never taxing, of course. But presumably this is costing businesses a lot of money.
Huge amount. Billions is being stolen from UK businesses at the moment. It does impact us personally as well.
Yeah.
But we do see fraudsters target more the business sector because that's where the bigger bank accounts are, and where they're seeing the vulnerabilities of that awareness across businesses, and they will target any vulnerability to try and unfortunately steal our money.
Yeah. Of course, we are now coming up to the 31st of January deadline. How frequently do you see fraudsters posing as HMRC? Are HMRC a particularly big target?
Yes, so a lot of the malware is being installed via email, so these are labelled as phishing emails. And until recently, HMRC was one of the largest phished emails in the UK. They introduced a fraud control called Dimmack, which is a tool that's provided by the Global Cyber Alliance, which is a free tool. Any business can switch that on. Lloyds has that switched on. So the Global Cyber Alliance, and their website is simply that, Global Cyber Alliance. They have a number of free cyber protection tools. So if you're struggling for investment in terms of cyber protection tools, I definitely would recommend checking them out.
Dimmack.
But Dimmack, D-M-A-R-C. Switch that on, and that's a really great control in terms of the phishing email scam. And since HMRC introduced Dimmack, they have dramatically gone down the table in terms of the amount of phishing emails sent posing to be from HMRC.
So this is where people put in an extra R or something in HMRC. It picks that up, does it? Is that
yes? So it prevents the fraudster from creating domain names that look very similar, posing to be from a genuine organisation such as HMRC. There's a number of emails that seem to be from Lloyds, so there'll be 3 L's, for example, instead of 2, which is quite hard to spot. We receive a lot of emails on a daily basis. So by switching on this tool, can dramatically reduce that risk.
Actually, that was something that we had here at ICAEW recently. We were all asked to do a 15-minute course, which we did at our desks. And one of my observations afterwards was that it was a great course, and it really did teach you the things to look out for, what were the triggers. But with I probably get 120 emails a day, maybe more. If I were to sit there and examine each individual email before I opened it, I don't think I'd ever get to answer any.
It's very hard, and I understand that challenge. One of the things that I have personally, and I recommend this to others, individuals and businesses, is that if an email comes from an external source, you can put a little red banner on the top. So a lot of my emails, as much as I have, yes, lots and lots a day, will come from colleagues, they're from an internal source. So when this email has this banner on and it maybe doesn't look a bit quite right, it gives me that kind of, those are the ones to take a little bit more detail on. And that's kind of how I kind of manage the risk there, because you're quite right, it's hard to analyse every single email.
Yes, well, you'd never make any money, would you, with your business? Exactly. Caroline, let's just talk a bit about the self-assessment deadline. At the moment, I guess we are wide open to people with stacks of tax returns waiting to go back to HMRC. Do you have any tips?
Well, the sort of things that we see are bogus websites, particularly which individuals might fall for, and where it will actually submit the return, but it will charge you a fee, where of course there's no fee for filing your tax return through HMRC's own software. So individuals in particular should look out for that. There was a case which my attention was drawn to a little while ago, and that was, and I think it was in the US, I don't think it was here, but it was where a tax agent was defrauded because they got an email saying that they needed to update their software, their tax return filing software, and they used that as a route to get malware in, because they knew that this would be the right sort of time when a tax agent might expect to have to upgrade their software. I think the reports we've had most recently have been more about telephone calls, actually, partly due to HMRC's, having had some success in dealing with emails. Far more reports of telephone calls, along with really nasty threats of court action and all sorts of things, and encouraging people to press buttons and hand over details and make payments. And we have had reports of somebody's client who actually did fall for this, and others who have carefully checked with their agents.
That's something we actually see quite a lot, is
Yes.
fraudsters using emotions to their advantage.
Yes.
So something that is, wanting to shock us, scare us,
Yeah.
because when our emotions and our anxiety levels rise, we maybe don't act as clearly as we would do.
Yes.
So that's one of the things we try and say, is if something seems too scary, or someone's asking us to act urgently, actually use that as a red flag and go, am I comfortable that this is right? That I very much understand is easier said than done, but it's something we see a lot in the fraud world.
Yeah.
Yes, and you mentioned earlier about, if you are encouraged to press button 1, how that can often send you off to a high fee-earning alternative phone line.
Absolutely. So even though that call may then ultimately want to ask you for your bank details and your personal information, and you feel at that point, I'm not happy, and end the call, they've still gathered some money from you because you've clicked on that button and gone to a higher rate number.
minute or something.
Yeah. And interestingly, the reverse also happened. So there was a lot of phishing emails from HMRC being sent from fraudsters saying you're due a tax rebate. Now, we're really happy if we're going to get some tax back from the tax man, so we'll click that email. Yes, it's usually a surprise. But something that's too good to be true is sometimes the way fraudsters will get away in as well.
But just to be clear, HMRC never sends emails which quote an amount of a rebate in them. It does, send some emails, but it usually is go and look in your online tax account for some information. They never send emails that quote an amount of a refund.
Do you want to just plug the personal tax account, the business tax account, anything like that at this moment? The people who haven't yet set up their own online credentials with HMRC.gov.uk?
Well, I think I would encourage people to set up their personal tax account. One of the best services in there is checking their national insurance contributions history, and so that is something that I would encourage everybody to keep an eye on, whatever their circumstances, because there are all sorts of unfortunate cases where people get to state retirement age and find they haven't got the contributions history that they thought they had. And I was on Moneybox on Saturday because a case was reported to them, and they asked us to comment on it.
Yep. Well, there are all sorts of taxes, and national insurance, of course, is very, very relevant for your state pension entitlement. Donna, I know you've got some elements to your fraud prevention process. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what people need to do there?
Yes, absolutely. So each individual's business, their fraud prevention framework will differ, but we break that down into 3 core elements. So one being technology, second being processes, and the third being people. So from a technology perspective, we need to make sure as a business that we have good quality antivirus software in place. If you want some help and advice, as mentioned, go to the Global Cyber Alliance. They've got lots of free tools The National Cyber Security Centre also provides lots of help and guidance around that. But when you do install some sort of antivirus software, make sure we're keeping on top of our updates, because that's a way that we see fraudsters get into organisations where we're not keeping on top of our updates, or we're assuming they're being installed automatically.
Yeah, I'll install it later because I'm busy at the moment,
yes,
that sort of thing.
Or
yeah.
my IT team do that, and we just think that they do that. So just have that open dialogue with our IT teams and talk about fraud risks. Yeah. From a processes side, implement those double checking procedures. Make sure that if we see any change in bank details, that we check those. If we're setting up a new supplier, that we check those. And it is just those simple checks to make sure that we'll keep ourselves protected. And then the third one being people. So I mentioned how the biggest vulnerability that we're seeing is awareness. So make sure that people are aware of these risks. We held a webinar with yourselves on the 31st of October, where myself and my colleague Vin went into more detail about the risks that we're seeing impacting businesses at the moment. Absolutely,
website,
still available, and we'll go into more detail into what businesses can do to help keep themselves protected. But do make sure your people are aware of these risks. It will protect your business, it will protect them as individuals. And think about how we can make sure that that kind of awareness is maintained. So hopefully we'll continue to do more events with yourselves, because they've gone down really well, and we appreciate the work that we're doing with you. And we do webcasts on a quarterly basis on our website, so lloyds.com/fraud. You can access, and you don't have to be a client of Lloyds to access those webcasts. We're just really passionate about getting the message out and protecting as many people and businesses as possible. And being done on a quarterly basis, we can tell you of any kind of current trends,
the latest,
anything new that's happening. They're recorded and are available, like your webinar as well, just to help keep that awareness going across.
And just one last bit of personal advice. We were talking about naivety earlier on, where you're asked for details like your first school, your first pet, mother's maiden name, and of course you don't need to give your actual first school, mother's maiden name, etc. Of course, if you make one up, you do have to remember what it is.
Yes.
But all that sort of data, it would be so easy for someone to build up a profile of you just by going to Ancestry or somewhere like that.
Yes.
They can find everything about your history.
It's scary, the amount of information that can be found out about ourselves, and we quite often see that the malware, when it's installed, is some months ahead of an attack, because fraudsters are gathering that information, gathering our details, getting ready for their attack. And quite right, when we set up security information, we can set whatever that is for ourselves. It doesn't have to be the genuine one that can help us in terms of protecting our information. And I think if we have an understanding of this is how fraudsters carry out these attacks, that's what makes us sit and think about those things, and think about the risk that we're putting ourselves under, and then maybe kind of close those gaps and those vulnerabilities.
That's great, thank you. Moving on, we've been talking a little bit about digitalisation of the tax system. We've been talking a lot about it in general. Caroline, you and I have been out talking about MTD at various district societies recently. Of course, most practitioners have now had a go at filing their first batch of MTD VAT returns for clients. Most of them are now saying, what's next? Some of them found that was very, very straightforward. Others found it a nightmare. But wherever they are now, what's next?
What's next? Yes, indeed. I mean, of the 2.2 million VAT registered businesses in the country, 1.3 of them have registered for MTD for VAT at the last count, and that actually includes 200,000 to 300,000 businesses that have signed up voluntarily. Their turnover is below the VAT threshold. They didn't need to, but they have, which I think must be encouraging HMRC to go for MTD for VAT for all businesses as the next step. That would seem to be the logic. But there is still a lot of work to be done. The system is not yet fully developed. So, for example, nudges and prompts aren't built into the system yet. HMRC there isn't yet the functionality to provide additional voluntary information, which was always part of the design. So I think in 2020 I would expect HMRC to focus on nudges and prompts and on that additional voluntary information. And then we know that there won't be an extension until 2021. And my guess is that MTD for VAT to all businesses would be next. I think there is a growing acknowledgement that MTD for income tax is much more complex, and even the Financial Secretary of the Treasury has been quoted as in front of a House of Commons committee as saying it was a very different kettle of fish. There are a lot of complexities which haven't been addressed yet. Sort of things like cross-year issues, the fact that HMRC doesn't know who in the income tax population is digitally excluded. There is a lot of development work still to be done. So I think MTD for income tax is likely to be rolled out over a much longer time frame than just 2021. HMRC clearly intend to do it and want to do it, but the pace and who they bring in at various stages, I think, is still that decision to be made. And certainly we know that it will require decisions by the relevant minister in the next government.
Yes, whoever the next government might be.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm inclined to agree with you actually. I think MTD for VAT extended downwards is by far the more likely. Whether they go all the way, I don't know, to very tiny businesses. We'll have to wait and see.
We'll see. And of course those businesses got the option to deregister.
Yes, but we've also been talking to the OTS, the Office of Tax Simplification, and their projects running in parallel with, I suppose, HMRC's examination of what else to do with MTD are quite interesting, aren't they? Looking at how some businesses, some small businesses, perhaps landlords, perhaps using some of the big platforms, might be encouraged to report more frequently.
Exactly, and that is something that I have explored in an article in January Tax Line for those who are members of the tax faculty, as to where it might go next, and made the suggestion that I think what HMRC actually needs is a number of different pilots of different approaches to really try out a number of different options, including the suggestions by the OTS, to really work out what is the best way to proceed, and how to come up with an overall strategy for MTD for income tax, rather than just doing a narrow add-on pilot. Well, we'll get self-employed and people with property income to report that bit of their income digitally. None of us have ever been clear how that fits into the overall strategy for income tax. MTD for individuals is on hold. Really, we need one look at the whole income tax reporting and payment system.
Yeah, and one of the problems that HMRC has always struggled with is getting the systems, the IT systems, built early enough and tested well enough in advance, to be able to have a good start. I mean, most projects kind of splutter a bit at the beginning. We know that one of the problems with the Trust Registration Service, of course, was that the software didn't work well enough, didn't do what was needed. And we're a bit worried about the fifth money laundering directive, which is going to be coming in next year, and exactly what type of trusts will need to be registered through, they're going to use the Trust Registration Service again, through that.
There's potentially a huge increase in the number of trusts that will need to be registered. I mean, at the moment, we just don't know. But because the UK legal system is very different from that in Europe, there are lots of things which are set up as trusts in the UK, come under UK law, but which would not be a trust in other countries. So it's very, very wide. And at the same time as HMRC is doing that, they are developing a new system to be able to register trusts, because the current system doesn't allow you to update data once you have filed it. So yes, there is a very significant concern over trusts. And then the other area is capital gains tax from April 2020, reporting and payment of capital gains tax on UK residential properties within 30 days of completion date is another very big change coming in 2020. And again, the bit that we're all concerned about is the development of the systems.
Yes, what the system's going to look like. Perhaps we should also say that we don't even have the legislation yet for that, do we? Because it was in the failed finance bill.
Well, no, the legislation for 30-day reporting is actually in place.
Oh, right.
The legislation that's not in place is for the changes to the residential.
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Principal private property.
Principal private residence, yeah. Well, quite a lot to look forward to, and what I've just been working on, in fact, more this morning, are the off-payrolling rules, IR35. And what's changing there. What I was looking at this morning, in fact, is the new CEST tool, the new Check Employment Status for Tax tool that HMRC has just updated. It looks to me like they've put in some new questions to understand whether the person who's doing the work has other engagements, perhaps of a similar nature, that might indicate that they are more like self-employed than employed, which is a good thing. That's something we've been working on. They still haven't factored in mutuality of obligation. I think that's possibly the more difficult one to put in, but that has been the subject of some case decisions recently. So I think that's going to be quite an important aspect. We do know that if you have used CEST and you've answered all the questions accurately, then HMRC will accept that as having done all you can, taken reasonable care to come to the status decision. And I would certainly recommend that people who are in that position, either as an engager or as a worker, should have a look at the tool and the fresh guidance that's just been published. We've got lots of tools on our website. If you haven't already visited it, the IR35 Hub, icaew.com/IR35, and you can find all sorts of tax bites, which are mini webinars. You've got full webinars, you've got tax guides, you've got little articles. Anything you've ever dreamt about on IR35 is on that website. But now it just remains for me to say thank you very much indeed to my guests. Donna, Caroline, thank you for joining us today. Thank you.